And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players, an MLS podcast. And guys, it is official. USL finally took their vote that they've been putting on for like 3 years now. They finally took a vote to it and have put in motion the plans to bring Pro Rel to the USA in 2027, 2028, along with their new Division One league. This undoubtedly will have an impact not only on MLS but US soccer as a whole. So we're here to dive into all of it, the goods, the bad, the uglies, the concerns, all of it. But of course, I couldn't do that alone. You guys would put your head through a wall if you had to listen to me talk alone on this. So we have brought back on friend of the pod, John from Loud and Proud Orlando. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me back, Andrew, man. Happy to talk USL and this exciting, new chapter that's occurring here in US soccer.
Yeah, man. Exciting is a great word for it because I think a lot of people see this as like, oh, one, it's gonna take down, one's gonna die, one's gonna live. It's like I don't know about that, but it is going to cause a lot of things in motion, and we're going to talk about all of it. But before we dive in, when you started following Orlando itself, were you there during the USL days as well, or were you diving into it just when they came in MLS?
Oh yeah, I have experienced all of the Orlando City timelines. We were USL club for 4 years before we turned MLS club. I actually worked for the team during that time while they were USL club. So I had some hands-on direct work with USL and then was part of the team that went to moving into MLS. So I had that experience of what it was then like to work with MLS and everything that happens there and the differences, inside and how these two leagues run their clubs that are in their actual leagues are really interesting. So that was a great time. And that actually, I know you're going to ask me about my scarf.
Yeah,
That
we can go
ties
right into it.
into my scarf because this scarf here is we did an Honor Thy History for Orlando City a few years back. Well,
Yeah.
last year. And that was because it was 10 years. So this logo here is an amalgamation of the old USL logo, which was like a three-headed lion. You can see it on my hat as well. And then they kind of comboed that with the new Orlando City MLS brand and kind of did a throwback because, of course, when like Orlando City and like other teams like Vancouver and Portland, when you go from USL to MLS, you got to make that rebrand.
Mhm.
So this is my scarf today for you, which is kind of honoring that history between the clubs. So yeah.
I'll tell you, and this might need to be a red flag for us. If you know when to transition into Scarf of the Week, you might be here too often. But we love it. We love your timing. I am breaking out one that I'm a big fan of because I have a tie to it. So this is, and I've told this story a couple times. I don't know if you've heard it, but this is Lexington SC. They are now in the USL Championship. They started in USL One, but before they started, they were Lexington FC, and it was a club that I coached at for 2 years before leaving Kentucky. So I met Sam Stockley. I met all of the people who were kind of in the works to buy and transform Lexington FC and a couple of other surrounding clubs into Lexington SC. So I was one season away from actually coaching in their youth setup, which was really fun. But I actually have worked well alongside with another club that's in the USL setup, which is SC United. The Banthams is what they're called, but they also have SC United Heat. Both of them I've seen play in the US Open Cup and in USL 2. So I've also taken in my fair share of USL. Now, before we dive into any of the actual information, we have to do our new favorite segment. Where's Connor? It's like Where's Waldo, but much more fun because Connor continues to misinterpret messages that I send him when I say, hey, we're going to record with so and so. So when I say, hey, we're recording with John from Orlando, he thinks, oh, we're going to Orlando to record. So he takes a plane. He's probably down there right now. And my guess is that when he figures out we're actually not doing this live, he's just going to pick himself up passes to Disney World or something and go hang out with Goofy and Pluto and just live his life. That's my best guess.
Connor seems like, the kind that would enjoy the Wizarding World of Harry Potter to me. Like
Oh,
he seems
100%.
like he's probably at Universal Studios. That's
Yeah.
that's where yeah, he's probably in Diagon Alley riding all the rides. So shout out
Yeah.
to Connor having fun in
I'll,
Orlando.
I'll be honest with you. I'm jealous of him because I think that'd be really fun personally. But yeah, listen, I hope he's having a good time. But we're gonna have a better time because we are going to chat U.S. soccer, MLS, USL, and the works. And there's nothing better than that. So, for the back, let's give a bit of background to the people who may or may not have been living under a rock the past couple of weeks, months, years, and talk about USL. USL, the country's second, third, and fourth division of U.S. soccer. voted this past week with a super majority to implement promotion and relegation system to their pyramid. That would include the new USL Division One league, which we spoke about a couple weeks ago, coming into their setup. So they're tentatively scheduled to start in 27-28 with only the top three. So the USL 2, where SC United is, would not be a part of this, but it would be the Division 1, the Championship, and USL League 1. Naming, I'm sure, is going to change because that's a bit confusing. It doesn't include MLS. It doesn't include USL 2. It's just these three leagues to start. And it comes with a myriad of positives, negatives, general questions, which we are going to try to answer today. But I want to start with the positives. So I want to throw it over to you, John, first to say, obviously, this is going to come with some positive. Which are your favorites so far? Like, what are you excited for about this move?
Having been someone who grew up in England and obviously lived their life being a Stoke fan, I am well aware of the positives and negatives of Pro Rel. Having watched my team be promoted to the Premier League and then relegated, like right now we are in a relegation battle at the bottom of the championship, potentially going to get dropped down into League One. So I can tell you from firsthand experience, it is all about the drama and the storylines that brings from Pro Rel. Like I think a big problem with MLS that a lot of people have, and this is something that you would never have in Pro Rel, is that at the end of the season, you get a lot of nothing games. You get a lot of games where nothing really matters. And the big thing about Pro Rel is you don't have that because every single game is either you're trying to battle to get to the top of the league or stay out of relegation. So for me, it's those storylines and it's that drama and entertainment that comes with Pro Rel that is the biggest pro that USL has here, and something that I believe the American people has started to understand through Wrexham and Ted Lasso and all of these other mediums that are just watching other leagues around the world. They now are starting to understand, oh, Pro Rel can be really exciting, and then if USL is doing that, maybe I want to try and pick a team so I can experience those ups and downs of Pro Rel in USA. For me, that is the biggest selling point of this whole thing and what really is going to make USL, different from anybody else in like MLS specifically.
Yeah, and one of so that this is not, by the way, this is not an episode for our listeners where it's going to be like gotcha here, gotcha there. We're trying to point out every John and I are good buddies, and we're going to have a chat here. But that's one of the things I actually disagree with this idea that every game matters. Because and I've done a little bit of number crunching on this because fans of this show know I'm a little bit of a nerd. I think it was the 23-24 season I did it for. And I looked at the Premier League just because it was the first league I looked for. The Premier League on the last day of the season had three of its 20 teams fighting for something. The championship was done. The top four was sealed. I think there were two teams fighting for a Europa League or Conference League, and there was one team, like the 17-18 was the relegation fight, I think, if I remember that correctly. Everybody else, their games
Right.
didn't matter. On the
Yeah.
last day of MLS, you had teams fighting for home field advantage. In the playoffs, you had teams fighting to get into the playoffs. You had, I think the number was up to like 7 or 8 teams, either per conference or total. I couldn't remember which one it was, but it was significantly greater in terms of just pure numbers. But that also ties into the fact of what story do you want to tell, right? So, and that's kind of where I agree with you in a sense where the story is different, right? It's okay. I'm either going to get home field or I'm traveling, right? This one is I'm going to stay in this league or I'm going to lose millions of dollars. It's a different story. Completely agree.
Yeah.
But
I
I would
think
agree with you.
specifically I was talking about like the bottom end of the table. Mid table where you got nothing,
Right.
that's not going to change, right? That's not going to, yeah,
Mhm.
totally right. The bottom end is where I'm talking about like if you look about last year and you think about what happened with the likes of Toronto,
Mhm.
there would be much more jeopardy there as opposed to just, oh, we're bad again. And that's I
Right.
think what really interests people.
No, for sure, for sure. And like I said, I agree with you. Like San Jose had nothing to play for with 6 games to go, right?
Yeah.
But if you
The
look
mid
at it again,
table,
yeah,
no
yeah. Well,
different. Yeah.
yeah, but and if you look at it again, right, Southampton's going to have 8 games that don't mean anything for them this year. They'll be down with 8 games to go. But again, it's what story do you want to tell, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that is one of the positives that comes with it. You tell a different story, right? So you're differentiating yourself from other sports in the United States. You make it different. You give you a reason to stand out to be like, hey, listen, like this matters, right? This is going to be different. The other side of it to tie it back into MLS for me is competitions breed success, right? With MLS being the top dog and nobody really pressuring them for the last couple of years, and I should say last couple of decades, they really have been slow to take the wheels off and start ramping it up, right? I mean, and we talked about this a couple of times in the last few episodes, but now, USL is going to come in and be like, listen, we're gonna start taking fans, we're gonna start taking locations, we're gonna start doing all this stuff. MLS needs going to find a way to stay relevant, and it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. But it comes from the fact that they're pushing the envelope here. If we just kind of sat around and did nothing, that is just cue for MLS to say, whatever. I'm just going to sit around, make more money, and do nothing. So I'm excited for that part.
Yeah, and you can't play them at their own game. You got to do something different, and
Right.
that is the different move, and it's a bold move. So a lot of pros for USL for real. I think also the international appeal,
Mm-hmm.
and some like, other people looking in would say, "Oh, this is what I'm used to." So I think that's interesting. I also think that a real pro for them is that they got that supermajority. It was reported in the Guardian article that Paul McDonough talked to them, and he was saying it was 90% of the owners.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an impressive feat for me to go around and to get all of your owners, well, 90% of your owners to agree to this. I think is a task that was not easy to achieve. So I think that should be praised.
Yeah, 100%. And it's very interesting because it was such a drastic turn, right? 6 months ago, they were like, "Oh, we're going to meet to talk about it," and they didn't even take a vote because they couldn't get enough on it. And now you've got 90% of people on it. That's really, really interesting. And I'm curious I wish I was a fly on the wall for that sort of conversation
Mm.
because that's not something where it's like, oh, we were at 85 and now we're 90. Like you were below 50 and now you're at 90. Like what pivoted? Who said what to get you in there? And I wonder if it was the USL D1 league. I'm assuming that might have been the idea. It's like, oh, now we can get into what we're going to call the top division of US soccer. Now it makes sense for us, right? Pro
Yeah.
Rel to get into the second division might not have been as enticing, right? The other thing that I think is exciting in terms of US soccer is that this is going to be the beginning of a proof of concept, right? We've talked, I remember when I first got into this speaking about soccer on the internet thing, and, I started diving into the pro rel world a little bit, and the whole thing was like, no, it doesn't make sense to make a person who paid $20 million to get into a league merge with somebody who paid $500 million and put that at jeopardy, right? That gap doesn't make sense to me. But 20 million to 15 million to 10 or 5 million, that makes sense, right? Or if you're going to do this, Division One Championship League One, now let's say it's 50, right? You're going to go from 50 million to 25 million to 10 million. Okay, that's still manageable. It's not two orders of magnitude different. But this is now a proof of concept that says, okay, if you find a way to do this by controlling the funding, right, to make sure that teams that go down don't blow up with loss of revenue, and there's no way to get out of USL and lose all that revenue and lose all those fans and all that stuff. You're gonna stay in USL no matter what. Now you start thinking like, okay, maybe that can go there. You have this idea. I mean, you're seeing leagues pop up all over the place with this sort of smaller scale stuff. The league for clubs, for example, coming in, I believe, in the fourth division. Somebody can fact check me on that. But I know that they've got tiered levels, or they're looking to get tiered levels, and you can throw them at the bottom of this USL tier, and now you've got another level, and now it grows and grows and grows. The Midwestern Premier League, add them into it as a regional fifth division league, right? Like grow and grow and grow. Now we're starting to see, okay, maybe this does make sense. And then you see either MLS jumps in, MLS tries to buy out, MLS tries to do a whole bunch of things, MLS folds, whatever it may be. But it allows proof to say this might work.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to say that a lot of other countries, obviously, having had the game for so long, they have the governing body. Like we always talk about the example being England, but the FA, for example,
Mhm.
US soccer is kind of that role, but also not really that role. They set some terms, but they're not the ones, leading the whole thing. They're not the ones really truly saying this is what we should do, this is how it's going to be. And a lot of other countries they would have already established that pyramid. What USL has done is say we're gonna make our own pyramid. Now, in my opinion, US soccer should be, say this is great. This is what we should have done, in my opinion, years ago. Um, and so they should have no reason not to see this as a positive. We're going to talk a bit more later about all of the barriers to entry that this might have, and all of the complications of making it happen per, US soccer's guidelines as to what a D1 and a D2 and a D3 league should look like. But just like base level for them, this is going to mean, increased stadiums, more markets, increased stadiums like soccer specific size stadiums as well. A lot of different things like more grassroots markets across the country. Like you said, I think it's opening up an option to have teams come in for that sort of, you could be an owner who's a millionaire, multimillionaire, as opposed to whereas MLS, the only new markets you're getting in MLS only is going to be billionaires who are going to be able to do that. Maybe there's some interest there with what's going to happen with MLS Next Pro, where they're going to pursue markets. But if you're US Soccer, it's much better for you to say, yeah, we're going to expand in a lot of markets with USL, and then they're going to be able to start teams small, and those teams can grow and develop through a Pro Rel system. You're able then to kind of do a lot with less money and spread a lot further, in my opinion, than you ever will if you're just relying on MLS alone. So I think for US soccer, there's a lot of positives here. I don't really know what downsides for US soccer there will be. We're going to talk about that from a composition, but for them, they have the leagues. If teams move up and down within the leagues, as long as everything's above board and what they approve, then I don't really see why they would have an issue with it. I also think a big pro for US soccer is the Open Cup. And if D1 comes in and Pro Rel and teams are fighting up and down and getting stronger, that's going to cause more competition for MLS. And you're going to have the Open Cup, which is really the tournament that US soccer actually runs. That's going to be the one that's potentially going to benefit from more competition and more excitement there, just to create a market that isn't so MLS heavy. I think is beneficial all around to US soccer. They're not reliant as much on them and can kind of look at USL to bring more and more players to the markets and eventually to their national team.
Yeah, and listen, we are not today going to dive into the shortcomings of the US soccer control of this country because, or at least the sport in this country, because that is a 4 hour conversation we do not have time for. But those who are in the know understand how poorly they've messed up. And it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to this because there are a lot of questions here, right? And I know you mentioned, before we get into the concerns, because I think there are a lot of them, Pro League standards being one of them. There are some negatives that come into this too, and it's one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to the promotion and relegation side of thing, and that's what happens when you go down. Now, we said that in a more controlled environment like they're in now, they have some ability to mediate some of those risks, but I think we put together a list of the last 5 years, or actually 4 years, because we didn't count the COVID year. So 21 into 25, and we basically took every club that called it quits for the last 4 years, and I think something, and varying levels, by the way, not all. Actually, no, I think this is first, second, third division, maybe. I got to check my notes, but I believe it's somewhere around the 35 to 40% value of all the clubs that have gone out in the last 4 or 5 years have made it known that they were, or maybe they didn't cite it this way, but it happened directly after a relegation. So they might not have said like, oh, we don't have the money to do it, we're done. But, if it looks like a duck, it talks like a duck. Right, it's a duck. So this risk of financial insolvency for teams going down, and the main reason being that fan revenue is a main driving force of the USL right now, right? They don't have a huge TV deal. They don't have a lot of sponsors and stuff coming in that way yet. I will preface that with yet. But if you go down, and we've seen MLS teams and teams all over the country where if your team starts playing poorly, a la the Carolina Panthers, you don't get fans in the door. If you don't get fans in the door, you don't get money. You don't get money, you're hemorrhaging, right? That is a legitimate risk of going down. And I know people don't want to talk about like, oh, everybody's going to stay with their team through thick and thin because that's what the game's about. No, I understand the beauty behind that, but I don't believe that's something that is going to happen right off the bat, right? Give it 15 years, maybe, but right off the bat, I don't think so. And I think that's one of the biggest risks right now that they're taking is they're taking teams that have okay to not grade attendances and saying, okay, now you're going to risk losing those fans and not being able to make it, or spending lots of money to get up to a level that doesn't pay you back out.
Yeah, I think it's a big risk from USL. I think they've always been in the shadow of MLS, trying to figure out where do we fit in this world of the US soccer or landscape.
Mhm.
So for me, I feel that they decided this was a move they wanted to make to differentiate themselves. And because of that, all of the risks that come with it are, gonna be part of that, of course, relegation. But like you said, right now, teams are folding anyway. And
Mhm.
so I think in a lot of ways, and the reason you got that 90% from the owners buy-in on this is because the upside from their point of view outweighs the downside, right? You can have a team right now in USL League One or there's, championship, and you can still fold, right? You can have a certain amount of, you can come in, you can have a few years where you get some fans. It doesn't really go well. You don't have the money to keep it alive and you fold. The same thing can happen when you have Pro Rel. The difference is the teams that come in at a lower level or wherever into the league system, they can then have the opportunity just purely based off merit to be able to rise up. So for me, I think that's the reason you see a lot of those pros outweigh the cons. Yes, the real dangers of teams folding, but like I said, it's already happened in this country. It happens a lot. It's something that USL has always dealt with, right? They have owners that are rich, but not insanely rich. It can
Mhm.
happen. But it's also something that happens across many countries across, like you get down in the lower leagues, all of this financial backing. Most of the lower leagues of English football is funded by owners who are just hemorrhaging money. Year on year, they're just giving out money. They're never until they get high enough up. I mean, you look at the Wrexham documentary, for example. These guys are bleeding millions and millions into a team that's in League Two, trying to eventually make it. The same thing would be said for what's happening here in USL. Promotion, relegation, you want to try and make yourself financially viable, but in reality, whether you have Pro Rel or not, a lot of the teams in the lower leagues of USA are going to have to be funded by owners who are digging into their pockets every year because the numbers, Andrew, just they often don't match. And it's very difficult. I mean, look at MLS and everything that they did in their early years to, keep the league alive. So a lot of that, I think the other cons is like parachute payments. Where did USL, how do they find the money for parachute payments? Who pays for that? Where does that come from? If that's something that they do go down, I think there are a lot of financial negatives, but for
Mhm.
me, that's the only negatives I see personally.
Mhm.
I think as a community, if your club gets relegated, I don't think that immediately means people stop going. I know
Yeah.
it's a very American idea of like, oh, was not watching the top flight anymore, therefore I don't want to go and watch it. It's not interesting to me. But I think soccer overrides that in a lot of ways where it's grassroots, it's local communities, people are invested in their club. If they go down, I don't think attendances are gonna they're gonna take a dip, but I don't think they're gonna be insanely bad where your club just gets wiped out from one relegation.
Mhm.
Clubs will rise, clubs will fall. But for me, the big cons of this is just the risks of financial, which, like I said, already kind of exist anyway.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you there, and I think it leads into a couple of my concerns here, but I am very, very on the train. I'm on board with this idea that this is going to be super, super successful for a select few teams. Like teams like, and I picked like Louisville, Sacramento, teams that were kind of on MLS's doorstep already, have this really good following, have had this really good following for quite a while. No problems, right? No problems whatsoever. My concern is something like, and I won't even pick teams that exist already. I will go here and say, okay, we've got a new Division 1 league coming in, and to do it, they are going to need seven, just pick 7 teams, right? 7 teams that they're going to have to place in there because they're going to need to hit these pro league standard things we're going to talk about in a second. Those don't have the dynamic fan bases that you would expect out of teams like Louisville and Sacramento and things like that, or Louisville for my friends in Kentucky. Yes, I know I was there. I know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. If those teams go down and say they go down back to back, now you're in trouble because now you just paid. I think we put the hypothetical at 50 million, right? Now you just paid 50 million plus whatever you spent on all these players that you're going to get, and now you're cutting your fan base in half. Now you cut it in half again. You're down to 25% of what you had 2 years ago. And again, this is a very, very worst case scenario, right? Well, and I understand that. But I don't believe like if you just turn a blind eye to the worst case scenario, it never shows up, right? And the other problem that I have with that is you see teams, and as a fan of Stoke City now, I feel like I knew that already, but I got a friend of mine as well who's also a Stoke City fan. We might have talked about this, where the they've been in the second division in a relegation battle for a couple of years now. They haven't been back to the Prem in a while.
Yeah.
There are teams that have never even stepped foot in the English soccer league, right? Is that the EFL, right? Is what's called
Yep.
the
hmm
football leagues.
The English Football League. Yep.
How long will and I don't want to say that USL is a semi-pro or non-professional because I understand that they are, but
Yeah.
how long will they be able to manage as a non-first division team, which is seen in America unfairly as not professional?
Right.
Before their fans say, "Oh, I'm only going to show up when you get to the top division." And that's kind of where one of my concerns is like, how is this going to work with fan engagement, right? How are you going to prove to these people like, oh, it's worth it? I know we haven't been in a promotion fight in 3 years, but don't worry, keep coming back, right?
Yeah, I mean it's the same as any other team, right? When your team stagnates and you just feel like a lot of people can get, disenfranchised and want to leave. I think the excitement of Pro Rel, a lot of it is to do when your team is hot and you're going up, or
Mhm.
your team is down and you're going down. Like, I'll give you some examples from the English Football League.
Mhm.
A team, for example, like Blackburn or Wigan, that was once a Premier League team when I was a kid growing up, and fell all the way down into like League Two and never really managed to recover. Or like Portsmouth, for example, a once great Premier League team,
Right.
no longer came back. And those communities now. Portsmouth still get like, 15, 20,000. This is
Mhm.
this is in England where everything is completely different, from the sense of you have years and years of fan bases that go back generations. We don't have that here in the US, so that is the concern, is when your team gets relegated, how does your fan base react that has only, been following the team for 5, 10 years? I think a lot of it comes down to, is US soccer fans at that level of passion and drive that your European or your South American fans are. And as someone who has been here, in the soccer landscape since like 2012, I could tell you that there are a lot of soccer passionate fans out there. And
Oh
I
yeah.
believe that this country is full of markets that have by far enough people in order to be able to sustain, to get you, your 10, 15,000 fans out for a week. I mean, England has got 90 clubs across a space that is far smaller, with a far smaller population. Now, of course, there's the difference in, American sports. You've got all of these other options. But here in the US, I do feel like it's growing to the level of passion where people will go watch their local club, they will support their local club, and they will support their local club despite them getting relegated. I genuinely think that is a thing, but USL has to develop that. They have to
Mhm.
bring in the players, they have to grow, they have to continue to create those storylines and connections with fans. But I do think your level of fan who's going to go and support a USL club, I believe, is enough of a fanatic that if they get relegated, they're not just going to walk away from what they're invested in,
Sure,
which is
sure.
was different from 10, 15 years ago. I believe
Right.
there's enough of those fanatics in the country now that are going to be that loyal. And really, at the end of the day, that's what USL is looking for.
And I think that's where my hang up with this is because I want to believe that, but I don't. And it might be because I've lived in New York for so long and I have walked around Red Bull Arena and seen every single jersey except a Red Bull jersey. And they're there just to hang out. So if Red Bull started doing poorly, which we saw, we dropped attendance by 3, 4, 5, 6,000 fans a year. Like it was significant. Yeah, so I've been trying to get a friend of mine into MLS, into soccer in general. And I sent him a message. I'm trying to get him to Chicago Fire, right? Because he knows Greg. He knows who Greg Berhalter is. Essentially, he has. We were doing like, oh, what MLS teams translate to NFL, right? I'm like, oh, Miami Dolphins haven't made the, haven't won a playoff game in 2000. Chicago haven't done anything since 2000. Like you guys are spot on. Like you'd love it. So I sent him to it. I'm like, this is the third week in a row you can watch Chicago Fire for free. Just turn on Apple TV Go. And you know what his response was? If you think I'm turning on a soccer game over March Madness, you are out of your mind. And that's a significant issue, right? And it gets even worse when it gets into the NFL. And there's the schedule thing. We can talk about that another time too, like what schedule they're going to go for. That's totally cool. But there is a significant, no matter where you go, with exception, there is a significant number of people who are going to look at you and say, I don't care if you can get to the top of any league. You're not getting in the way of my college football. You're not getting in the way of my college basketball. You're not getting in the way of my MLB and NHL, NFL. So can you get into the enough markets where your team that has this pathway to the top of something that in the grand scheme of American sports doesn't matter to the majority of individuals? Can you get into the right markets where they say, yes, that does matter to me? Because it's my, and again, maybe this is just my New York coming out of me, but it's my opinion that as I've walked around and said, hey, I see you're wearing a Liverpool kit. Like, have you seen the Red Bull game? And they laugh at me. They go, why would I watch that? The quality's garbage. I don't see USL with Pro Rel fixing that argument. That's one of my other big concerns is the fact that you need to pick the right location for that to make sense.
100%. And I think that's something that USL has been always dealing with, right? They
Yeah,
haven't just randomly chosen soccer markets to go after. For example, like Orlando City was started actually as the Austin Aztecs in
that's right.
Austin,
That's
and
right.
it was too early for soccer in Austin, and we did not get the fans that we hoped. They moved the franchise to Orlando, to a city that was starved of professional sports outside of Orlando Magic. And as a USL club 10 years ago, we were getting 20, 10, 20,000 for some games.
Right.
So I think it's all about the market you go after. I think it's all about having those markets that are starved of MLS for one. Also being big enough, right? I think, New York has always got more options because it's so massive. There are these markets that you can go in and steal some of the market share, even if MLS is there. But I think more importantly, there's a lot of markets that are untapped and have that ability to really attach themselves to a local team. And I think that's when, Andrew, it becomes a little bit different from, of course, your big sports in America. When I'm saying, you're going to watch them at home or at the bar, and they say, okay, NFL is on, or you can watch MLS or USL. Most Americans are probably going to pick their favorite sport that they're already into. But I think what's different is where you don't have that local actually going to the game, where I can't just walk down the street and go to an NBA or an NFL game.
Hmm.
And I actually, like you said, you bring someone into that environment and they say, hey, this is really cool. This is local. This is in my backyard. I feel like I'm part of something that's a little bit niche. And I think that's a big selling point for here with USL. They've always used is like, come be a part of something that's really cool.
Different,
Come be a part
sure.
of something that only some people are in, and a lot of soccer fans really enjoy that. So for me, the pro rel thing doesn't really change any of those tactics that USL are going after. I think what changes is like if that does happen and you're a small club, then you could grow and become bigger, and then it could be like, wow, look how many fans we now have. The difference for us when it was Orlando was we obviously got to the top of USL and couldn't go anywhere like many other clubs. And then you do the promotion by, franchise purchase essentially, which is what it was, and to MLS. And that was great. And then the club expanded and it became a huge thing. You're playing Champions League and all this, but it all started from grassroots of USL. So if you don't have these grassroots market teams that can then grow and get bigger, to potentially be, a really big entertainment in your own market, then I think it's difficult for those teams ever to get there. There's only going to be so many San Diegos that can come in with $500 million
Right.
expansion fees, where there can be a mass of Oakland Roots, for example.
Yeah, what 100%. I think MLS expansion fees have gotten exorbitantly out of control. Like there is no reason anybody needs to pay 500. This is not now granted the Boston Celtics I think just sold for 6.2 billion. So if we're being, if we're comparing apples to apples here, right? Like, is it
Oh,
really that much?
yeah.
Right. But here's the last thing. And by the way, I want to put this out here. Like, I'm not putting out all of these concerns because I'm like, man, I want them to fail. Right. This is not me. And I know I support MLS, but I support soccer all over the place. So I don't want to see anybody fail or crash and burn. But I am putting out legitimate concerns because I think that they're valid, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking here at, and again, very early into USL season, but I'm looking at the transfer market attendance, right? Lexington SC, who is building the new stadium, their home opener in the USL Championship, their first game in the second division, did not sell out. They had 5,000, which was a record crowd for them, but their increase from USL one to Championship was, I think, and don't get me wrong, I think maybe you got it up 1,000, 2,000, maybe give or take. And I'll double check that just to be sure. But is this idea of pro rel going to, and this transitions to another concern of mine, is the idea of pro rel and like the story behind it going to generate enough new fans and returning income as an investor to make it worth spending 6 million on a player, right? Or 6 million on a roster, for example, let's say, because one of the other issue or not issues, one of the other concerns I have is this idea of money, right? Is that pro rel going to not only in terms of fans but TV deals, right? You need to have a good TV deal to spend money to clubs to be able to do this sort of stuff. I mean they're on about five different streaming services right now. I can never find which one half the games are on. But is that deal going to give them enough money to do what they want to do, right? Is it going to be enough to say, hey, if you go in and say, okay, our TV deal says that if you get promoted from USL Championship to USL D1, you're going to get an extra $300,000, and if you win the whole thing, you're going to get $500,000. $800,000 is about the salary hit of one designated player in MLS. Is it really going to be worth it for these investors to shell out so much money without a good TV deal, without this draw? And that's one of the concerns I have is I don't know if it will be because I don't know. See how I phrase this properly. I don't know if TV deals are going to jump on this because it's not the Premier League. It's not the Bundesliga, right? Look at all the fans there, right? You're going to look at a Lexington game with 5,000 people and be like, okay, cool, but you're playing on what looks like, it could be a high school field. It's not. It's very nice, by the way, but it looks like with the way the stand and the stadium are, it's just a basic high school field. Why would we put that on TV? I don't know if you're going to find a ton of people who are going to give them, let's say, Apple TV money from MLS. And that is something that I think also comes into effect because if you're going to try and compete with MLS, you need to compete on quality, not on the basis of, oh, I'm not MLS, right? And right now, that's difficult to do based on spending. MLS is spending lots and lots of money on players. USL is not for a good reason. But are you going to have enough money to say, and this has been the argument for MLS forever, right? MLS, you get $300,000 for winning MLS Cup. Okay, if I'm an owner, why am I spending $18 million on a player to win 300,000? Right? It's the same deal here. If your payout is going to be small, what's the point other than saying, oh, I got promoted to a league, I can get 2,000 more fans in. That's one of the biggest concerns I would have with this.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of talk about the USL final, championship having more viewership than the
Yeah, I saw
MLS
that.
Cup final, but I think some new facts came out. The MLS Cup final might have had more. I don't know, but there's clearly this bragging between like, which league is being watched the more. You guys had that whole conversation about, the other day about streaming
Right.
versus regular television. So that's a whole argument here that depends on where you land on that one. I think I agree with what you're saying. You can't you can't compete on quality with MLS right now. And I think they have to take Pro Rel, but also increase the quality of all of the teams and bring better players in because Pro Rel with low quality play is not going to sell as well, that anywhere near as well as MLS with the level they have now. So that is a big issue. And to get those better players in, you need that media money most likely because they're not going to get it from ticket revenue or sponsorship as it is right now. I agree with all of that. And I think what's really interesting here is I think there's a potential for a big streaming service to come in like Apple did, but with an incentive to create a documentary that they film all three tiers and they create every single year, just like we've seen with Drive to Survive and Netflix, or for example, NWSL just did one with Amazon. And I think they could tie something like that into a streaming package and get a really big deal out of it and sell the American people on watch the storylines of the players and then also watch the league on the same channel. Something like that I could see happening. And I can see these, a big streaming giant going in and saying, okay, we're going to be able to get a whole league and the storylines and all of that for, a decent amount of money, not insane amount of money, but enough that USL would go, okay, this is way better than whatever we're going to get from, the regular TV deals that we have at the moment. Regardless, yeah, they have to figure out a way to get more money out of the TV deal, because that is a big way to be able to spend more money on players that they're just not going to be able to find revenue any other way outside of that. That this is
Yeah.
significant enough, in my opinion. Like sponsorships, maybe if you're really good in your market, maybe ticket sales, not, maybe when they increase their stadium size, but even then, it's a
Mhm.
long way off what MLS is going to get,
Right.
and what their competitors. So yeah, for me, I think it'd be really interesting to see something like that where they get the league and the rights to do a TV show documentary tied into that, and I think the both would feed each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what MLS is doing with their onside, series, trying to get the fan engaged in the person less than the team itself. And I agree. It's a great way to get involved and do that. I mean, you saw Wrexham. Nobody knew what Wrexham was, and most people will never ever see Wrexham play ever unless it's a friendly here. But they're tied in because they like
Yeah.
the players, they like the story behind it, they like the TV.
I mean, that's
I do.
ESPN and Hulu, so maybe that's the one.
We had that conversation last week, but I'll tell you, Apple TV. If ESPN gave Apple TV money, MLS, nobody's complaining. And I believe that's the way USL is going to go. Is they're going to say, okay, ESPN, we've got this whole thing. It's going to be you're going to sell this. This is what it's worth. Pay it so that we can do this right. And I would hope that they find success in that. I do want to just correct my stat before. Lexington last year had 1,600 fans a game. This first game, their brand new opener, they had 5,000. So they about doubled it, maybe tripled it. So I'll correct myself there, but it was their home opener, so and they didn't sell it out. So there is one other thing I wanted to chat about before we move on to the kind of closing here, and it's one thing we haven't touched on, which is that we said we were going to touch on, which was the Pro League standards, right? And we've kind of been glossing over them a little bit, but just to be very, very astute about this sort of stuff because it is. This is the biggest barrier, in my opinion, for them to go over, right? So this is for their Division One stature because they have yet to have that approved, and this would be any team being promoted into this division would need to meet these standards as well, which is the biggest hurdle for me personally. Is you can get 12 teams for this first division and then 14 by year three that all hit this thing, but the second you put somebody up there and you can apply for waivers and stuff. I understand that, but if they don't hit it, now you're in trouble, right? So 75% of the teams need to be in markets of 1 million people or more. That's going to be tough if
Yeah.
your second division team plays in a market with 500,000 people and gets promoted. Now you're out of. Which, by the way, that is the most at this point in history is the most useless part of this. I believe we're at a point where we don't need that anymore.
I think, yeah, metropolitan markets too is like, that can change city to city. And like,
Right,
there's
exactly.
so many, it's just a little bit too vague, but also too restricting at the same time.
Correct. Yeah, that can go, and I don't think anybody bats an eye, right? League stadiums need to be enclosed and have a minimum seating capacity of 15,000. That's also a very big hurdle, especially if, certain teams right now are still playing in baseball stadiums, as are MLS teams, by the way. But those baseball stadiums, I believe some of them are minor league that don't hit 15,000. Again, somebody can fact check me on that, and I'd be happy to be wrong. But there are stadium that, do not hit those
Oh,
levels. So right now,
most of
most of them
them.
don't. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now.
I think there's like four championship clubs that have that at the moment. I want to
Yeah.
say off the top of my head.
Right now, I'm looking at two, but that's because two, it looks like not everyone has hosted a game.
Hmm.
So right now, just two of the 14 that I'm seeing have hit those. And there are some that are close and can expand. But
Yeah,
that, again, if we're looking at saying four are in that market
it's a
and you
small
want to set,
amount for sure.
right, and you need 15 to get up there, you need to, within the next 3 years, find what is that, eight more teams to say, yeah, we'll build 15,000 seat stadiums in 3 years so that we could play,
Yeah.
or rent out
They,
football stadiums, which MLS got dumped on for years for playing on fields with football lines. Right now, you're going to have to go back to that, right?
yeah, I mean they do have some clubs ready to come in.
Yes.
My assumption on this would be that a lot of the teams in USL League One would potentially move up to the championship, and a lot of the
Mhm.
championship teams would go for the requirements for D1 to the USL Premiership, let's say, which they have actually um, put in the rights to own the name USL Premiership. So it might be that is what it's called. So there's going to be clubs moving from the championship up to the Premiership for them. So then you're going to have new teams probably added into League One. Maybe they'll add teams into all three tiers. I think a lot of it will be the dependency on the new owners and what they feel comfortable with. Like some of these new owners will come in and say, great, yeah, like I want to be a level three team. I want to be a League One team. So that works for me if there's more spaces in that. Whereas other teams that are in the championship level are probably vying to be one of those first, teams moved up into the quote unquote premiership for them as well. So it's going to be some reshuffling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the other issue too, is everybody glams over the idea of like, oh, you can start at the bottom and work your way up. If you start at the bottom and you're playing at a high school field, uh, and again, that's an exaggeration, people. I understand that I'm exaggerating this, right? But and then you get promoted in your first year and you don't have the money to get there, what's going to happen, right? Are they just going to say, "Oh, stay down, sorry," and then the next person goes up? Is nobody going to go up and down? Like, where does this kind of fall? Are you basically
Yeah.
saying, okay, we're going to have Pro Rel, but only for the people who hit all of these categories, which is basically like locking it into one league anyway, right?
Well, I think that's exactly what the issue is because D1, D2, D3, all of these, standards were written for teams that aren't going to move. It
Right.
was never designed. None of this was ever written with the idea of a team moving. So if you say in D1 you've got to have 15,000, you assume all the teams are going to be there. It doesn't account for new teams coming into that league that were just in a league below before, not having any time to prepare to enter this new league to meet the requirements. It was never designed to have these teams moving in and out. So I really think that US soccer has to and should take these standards and make them, you know, more usable, make them really just takes out some of these issues that are going to be created from, what USL is trying to do is very ambitious and should be commended. And I feel US soccer could quite easily stop them just by saying, hey, it's not going to work based on our standards. But in reality, US soccer have created these standards for what? Like just because they decided one day this is what the standards are. So they can just decide once again to change them to benefit this. And I think the other one is the, four teams based across East and Central Pacific time zones.
Right.
How does that work with
Hmm.
Pro Rel? Like what happens if all your Eastern teams get relegated?
Also, where's
There's
Mountain Time Zone? Why are we disrespecting the Mountain Time
Yeah,
Zone?
I,
Like,
I I laughed at that. I was like,
yeah.
yeah, you three
Well,
time zones. Okay, all right.
here's what
Um,
I'll say is that this reads like a 5 year production plan. This reads like somebody who sat down and said, okay, we have failed 18 different soccer leagues in the last 100 years. We need a plan right now to say we need to get to this point by 5 years from now so that we can survive, right? And I believe that's what this is about. Like the biggest part of this is financial viability. You need to be an owner who can absorb losses, right? And that's one of the other things everybody comes in is like, oh, you can be a fan-owned club and everybody can. Not really, right? Because if you go out and buy somebody, we lose money, and everybody's like, "Oh, I'm pulling my money now." Your club folds, right? So this was
Yeah.
written in 90 whatever, or whenever they came out.
Yeah.
When were they last?
Yeah.
I think they were last updated 2023.
2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
when
the financial viability, I'm all for. I think that
right,
is
absolutely.
is very important, and they should have that. I think there's just the other parts that don't
Agreed.
work.
100% agreed. We can adjust those, but I do think that there is still room for this to exist because you need to make sure that things don't go south. Now,
Yeah.
every single part of this I can look at and say, okay, this makes sense of why it's here, but I think that the levels are still too high, right? Metropolitan markets in areas of 100 or a million people, it makes sense, right? You need to be in areas where people will come and just mosey in and watch you play, right? Does it need to be a million people anymore? I don't think so, right? I think we can go lower than that. Stadiums of 15,000 people. I believe that it's important to have stadiums that people look at and respect, right? Because we're trying to gain respect not only locally but globally, right? Does it need to be 15,000? I don't know if it does, right? Those are conversations you can have, but I don't think that one place that you can falter on is financial viability and owners with money, because if you don't
Yeah.
have that part of it, you're not sustainable. I think yeah. So the league or the owners must or the ownership group must demonstrate financial capacity to operate for 5 years. That's important. If you can't show that you can't run a team, and I'm sure the league has operating costs that they predict it's going to be. If you show up and you're like, I have $3, right? You're the SpongeBob meme, right? Here's $3. What
Yeah.
can I do with it? You can't
Yeah.
run a team. You can't. You just physically can't. It doesn't matter how much crowd surfing or crowdfunding you do or whatever it may
No.
be, which is
And nor should you
awesome.
be allowed to either. Like that
Correct.
I do not, yeah. I all of the standards need to be reduced. I think
Hmm.
maybe I don't the financial viability one, that's something that I couldn't tell you.
Right.
Haven't got a degree in finance, but maybe that one also should be brought down slightly. I think
Hmm.
the big indicator here is, when you look at the D1, the D2 standards that USL is currently, adhering to, um, it's 75% of metropolitan areas at 7,500. 7,500,000. So it's close, but the other one that's really far away is the stadiums all have a minimum capacity of 5,000. So you've gone from 5,000 to 15,000 on your stadium capacity. I think that is really too far
It's
for
a big
one
jump.
level of the game to the other. And so I
Yeah.
think that a lot of the standards there, and a big one that needs to be reduced is that one. And if they could bring it down to 7.5 or 10,000 or something a little bit more reasonable, because I think what is in danger of happening from these USL clubs as they try to meet the standards of these stadium requirements is them moving out of really nice, unique stadiums and environments for fans and
Hmm.
moving into what nobody wants, which is you playing in, local high school stadiums that are big enough, or a football stadium, or a baseball stadium, or anything
Sure.
that isn't soccer specific. So if US soccer could adjust that, and then you're able to expand your club. So, right, like if you look at Indy 11, for example, one of the better championship clubs in USL over the years, they wouldn't meet the requirements of the metropolitan area, I believe, to be a D1 club. So how do you just create more people? You can't do that. So US soccer has to adjust on the metropolitan thing, because there's markets here that are just not going to meet those requirements, but there are teams of those markets that deservedly should be a D1 club, in my opinion.
No, like one of the things I've always said was you can take every requirement. I mean, I'll just use the ones for metropolitan markets, right? Shift it up one, right? Go from a million to 750,000. Go from 750,000 to they don't even have one in Division Two, but you can drop that down to 500,000, right?
Hmm.
Open it up so more places fit within your bubble, and now you're doing something right. I think that is the right way to go about it because again, these were written. My guess is they've been edited over time, but my guess is these were written early in MLS to ensure stability, right? We don't know how this league is going to be received. We don't know where we're going to be. We're 30 years in. We've got thriving markets all over the world, not only in MLS, but in USL, USL1, like they're there. Now you can open it up a little bit and say, okay, we can take this gamble and still be okay. And that's
Yeah.
where I think that this needs to go is make sure that your owners are still financially viable. Make sure that they do not lose money to the point where they're like, I'm good and nobody wants to buy it because I've run it into the ground. We'll just shut up shop. See you later. And then open it up so that you can have more first division teams in other areas, right? And that's one of the other positives that come out of this is you have the opportunity to put more first division soccer in more areas. That's never a bad thing, ever.
No. I think that the competition that this will create, hopefully, if it's done right for the US soccer landscape, can only be a positive thing. Um, I also think that MLS, probably doesn't like the idea of more and more markets being taken up. I think a lot
Hmm.
of what USL has always fought against, and I remember when they were fighting against NASL back in the day, there was the USL and NASL, and they were they were fighting for that tier two, and USL won that battle. So they're not stranger to a US soccer landscape war, as it were. They've done this before. They've always been fighting with MLS on stuff. And I think this one is interesting because I think it's more appealing for these smaller markets to go, I'm gonna be in a pro rel system than it is to just say, okay, I'm going to sign up for MLS Next Pro and
Hmm.
know that my club is never going to be an MLS club official. We're just always going to be a tier two market. So I think, perhaps this also forces Don Garber and the rest of them at MLS to have a think about what their next move is going to be because right now the latest shot was taken by USL with this very impressive and bold move by them.
Oh yeah, this is going to start an expansion war that is going to just blow anything that NASL, USL, MLS, NASL, MLS. I mean, it's going to blow it out of the water. It is going to blow this thing up, and it is either going to be absolutely for the right reasons and good things are going to come of it, or the soccer world's going to implode and we're going to have nothing again. But let's see how it goes, right? I want to leave us with this. Give us your final thoughts. You sum it up just as quick as you can. What are your thoughts on this? How does this work? Is this a good move? Is it going to work? And where does it end?
I think it will work. I think you got two different things. MLS is trying to be like the NFL. USL is run by guys that were ex-Europeans and South Americans, and they want to run it like the rest of those leagues, and that's exactly what they're doing. This is their move. I think it's very exciting, and I personally never thought we would see the day where Pro Rel came into USL. So I think there's a lot to be celebrated here. Of course, we have concerns. They're going to have to figure out a whole bunch of issues as to how to actually make this work. But my last and final thought is if we do see US soccer really push back and fight on this, I think it confirms my fear and what a lot of people's fear is that MLS has a pretty sturdy grip over the US soccer landscape and are not allowing this to happen. And I don't want to see that. I want to see both leagues be able to grow. And if this is the path that USL have chosen, then I hope US soccer support it and make it happen.
I don't think there's any question that MLS has a very controlling stake in it because I believe that a lot of outside of the intertwine of the leadership of both groups, like that is obviously there, but I do believe that there is a reason that US soccer is where it is today, and it's because MLS is what it is, right? And it almost feels like people feel like, oh, we owe them, right? Like look at what MLS has done to get us there, and that's not the right way to go about it. But it does feel like that's kind of the vibe right now is like, oh, MLS was here first. They've done all this work, but it is very much a what have you done for me now lately, right? I've said this before about USL and this D1 league and the Pro Rel thing, and it feels very Hail Mary, right? We talked about it before where it's you went from 6 months ago not having enough people to even get to a vote to 90% of people saying, yeah, let's do it. It feels like they came in and said, listen, this is somebody got inside information that MLS is about to make a big move, right? Like draft. You've seen Draft Day, the movie? Like
Yeah.
somebody's got to, listen, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Well, we got to counter with this and blah, blah, right? And they're like, we got to throw it out, right? And I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that's what this happened. This is the feeling that I'm getting, right?
Mm.
It's almost like let's see what happens, see where it goes, and I see it ending in one of two ways. First, there's a merger. MLS sees that this proof of concept actually works, and they go in and buy up something. I don't know how the logistics would work, but essentially, um, USL gets themselves a nice payday, and or the owners at least get a nice payday, and um, you know MLS realizes, oh, this is something that can work, and now they've set up all the infrastructure. We just buy it up because that's what it feels like they do all the time anyway, right? The other way, and the way that I don't want to see it, is that this doesn't work. It doesn't bring in as many fans as I think it's going to. It doesn't pay out right in a sponsorship deal or a broadcasting deal that gives them enough money to do what they want to do. Certain teams shut up shop. The rest of them say, okay, we're just going to say screw it, and then MLS picks up whoever's left. Don't want to see that happen, but it's not out of the question because it is a big risk, right? I think there's a very small chance that this booms USL to top popularity. They're a top five, in the top five league in the world conversation, but that is, I mean, at most 30 years away.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they can survive this battle for 30 years just because MLS, and the reason I say is because MLS has such a big head start. The infrastructure, their work global recognition, their play style, the money, the players, the academies, the training setups, they've got everything 30 years advance. So it took MLS 15 years to drop DP money on Beckham. 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. And they had nobody that they were fighting with. Nobody really watched overseas, maybe some Liga MX, but for the most part, it was just them. And they needed 10 years to figure it out. Now USL is not only fighting against MLS and Liga MX, but also the Premier League, the Bundesliga, the Serie A, the La Liga. Everything is at the touch of your fingers, right? Can you really afford to drop? And we talked about this. Can you afford to drop these salaries along with getting to the money that's going to take to get to the standards of Pro League standards? And then risk not drawing fans or not going up and earning that money. Um, Listen, I think it's probably going to be a mixture of both. I think for the majority of this, it works for these teams. We talked about it before, but I do think that some teams won't succeed here, and that's just going to be
Yeah.
the nature of the beast.
Yeah. The last thing I will say is anybody who has reservations about what this is and is it fair and like, teams will die, all of these things. Promotion relegation, in my opinion, is the most American way to do
Hmm.
sports. It is survival of the fittest. You are the best and you're able to stay up and stay relevant and continue to grow and get bigger and better. That is the American way. The MLS system is almost anti-American in the sense of we're all gonna be buddy buddy and everybody gets a share, and it's much more of a together unified system. Whereas the open market, which America and capitalism and the American dream is built on, that's what pro rel essentially is. So I always think it's interesting to me that America might have some resistance against something that I kind of see as truly American.
I think the only issue that most people have with it is that it influences a lack of um not lack of it gives you the opportunity to see not the best teams. And by that I mean um look at England, look at Germany, right? Like you've got
Right.
your top teams and that's great.
Yeah.
But you also have some teams that don't belong anywhere near there. And it's like, okay, I really have to watch these guys for 34 games a year. And that's where I think the main
Yeah.
sticking point is. Well, I agree with you, by the way, that is the opposite of what the American dream stands for.
Right. I'm just saying
Um,
the market system, the way it works
yes,
is
correct.
extremely American in its
Yeah,
nature.
which is very interesting. And there's another conversation there, but we won't go on. We've been doing this for a little bit now, and I know our listeners are getting tired of us. But there is that conversation between like, listen, like, think of America, right? Like Amazon, Apple, like all these big brands, that's what they go to. There's not very many people who are like, yeah, I'm going to stick with the little guy, right? So if you go and do this thing and you end up having, because I don't believe USL has a hard limit on what they can spend. Again, I might be wrong there. I need to brush up on my USL roster rules here. I know that they've got salary limits, but I think in terms of like spending on players, there's nothing that they're like held to in like a cap that way. That being said, if you end up creating something like England where it's like, okay, well now I've got the four or five big teams and everybody else is just fighting at the bottom, do people care about it, right? And again, I'm not saying that it does or doesn't, but it is something there. But what I'll say is that this anti-MLS crowd is going to have their work cut out for them when this happens, if this happens, because for years it was the quality isn't good enough, and I'm not going to watch it, right? I'm only going to watch Man City, blah 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 blah. And you don't have Pro Rel, right? It always gets tossed on the back end. It's never the first thing; it's always the last thing. USL is not bad. I enjoy watching USL when I can, but the quality, especially in USL League One, is not MLS, and a lot of USL Championship is not MLS. There are some teams that can, but not all of them. So they're either going to need to own up and say, yeah, I just wanted to talk smack on the internet, get likes, and I'm going to watch bad soccer with Pro Rel because that's actually what was most important to me. Or what I think is most likely going to happen is they're going to come out and say, oh, you have Pro Rel, but you're still American soccer, and I'm not going to watch it. And that's kind of the issue. But listen, at the end of the day, we're 3 years, a World Cup, a Club World Cup, and probably a lot of U.S. soccer political red tape away from this becoming a reality. They still haven't been awarded that D1 league. The plans have yet to be even remotely laid out, but they have secured enough interest to say that they want to do it. Now, the puzzle pieces will fall into place, and we will have to see how that impacts U.S. soccer. It's going to be an enjoyable ride from the outside, no doubt. But I wanted to thank you so much, John, for being here and having this very, very fun talk with us. Please tell people where to find you and what you do.
You can find me at Loud and Proud Orlando. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. We cover everything Orlando City, everything Orlando Pride, and anything soccer happening here in Central Florida. So check us out.
Short, sweet, and to the point. He's got it down pat because he's got what over you got over 1,000 on YouTube, right? You've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, we've been doing this a while. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
he's a pro. If you guys are looking into anything Orlando vibes, go check him out. This is the first time we've chatted non like Red Bull Orlando stuff. This is great. I really enjoyed this.
It's a nice break to talk USL and MLS and big picture stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Big picture stuff. Because we're always down to the nitty gritty, the lineups, the injuries, the young players. It's like, okay, that's really fun, but it is cool. Just take a step back and look at it from a big picture. So thanks so much for joining me with that. We're gonna have to do this again at some point and keep going because like we said, there was so much that we skipped over that was like, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this. Well, we're gonna have to make time for it because it's gonna be a very, very big part of what we do. If you're new here, we are the designated players. Connor and I will be back here together at some point, but like we said, he's out in Harry Potter world. But this is what we do. We take big news coming out of MLS, US Soccer, USL, and we talk about it, give our honest opinions, right? If you like that sort of stuff, follow us along. And we also do MLS history. So if you want to know where MLS came from and how it got to where it is, we do that too. So come follow us along. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.